Hey, and welcome back to the Mostly NBA podcast. This is episode 6, and I am Michael Higgins.
And I'm Matt LeVay.
And we're coming to you with some breaking NBA news. Wanted to get an episode in while the news was still fresh. Matt, obviously, what I'm mostly discussing is that DeMarcus Cousins trade from Sacramento to New Orleans on All-Star Game night. While Boogie Cousins was sitting in New Orleans, he was informed that that was his new destination. This comes after a little bit of no NBA news. We've kind of had... a bit of an explosion here as of late. But DeMarcus Cousins, he's been a guy that has seen his ups and downs in Sacramento. That organization dealt with a lot of his antics over the years, but through it all, he gave them just such great performances. I think he's one of the top 3 centers in the league, for sure, in the NBA, if not the best center in the league. And, now he's teaming up with Anthony Davis, another one of those top 3 in New Orleans. And I think that's obviously a huge move for a team that's kind of a fringe playoff team. Interesting for Cousins because this is his first change of scenery in the NBA. I mean, you get a guy with the kind of personality that he has, and a lot of guys don't, stick in one place for a while, but Cousins made it last in Sacramento for a lot longer than people thought. And then, you had him making the comments in the beginning of the season, he wanted to see his jersey hanging in the rafters in Sacramento. He wanted to retire a king. And, general manager Vlade Divac, making it known that he wanted to keep Cousins, that Cousins was not somebody they were giving up, especially with the Kings pushing for that last playoff spot, I believe only 2.5 games out at the All-Star break. So, Matt, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, Cousins, I didn't really expect him to get traded just because of the commentary over these last few months, not only from Cousins but also from Kings ownership. So what are your thoughts on just the shock factor of the trade?
Yeah, so I definitely think that it just kind of took people by surprise. Obviously, you heard a little bit of talk, though, as the trade deadline is approaching and whatnot, about, they could possibly be shopping around. But, him and Divac both, sat together. Divac and ownership, they went into DeMarcus Cousins' home and they had a conversation with him about what his future would hold, what his feelings were, currently. And Cousins clearly stated that he wanted, to stay in Sacramento. And, like you said earlier, Mike, he wanted to possibly retire there, have his jersey in the rafters and whatnot. But so that, I think, is the biggest thing that kind of took people by surprise. I mean, they really didn't think it would happen, but obviously here we are. The Pelicans giving up, Buddy Cheese, just almost the steal of a century, some are calling it, for what they were able to get out of it. Just such a talent, as DeMarcus Cousins is. I just think that's extremely scary. I mean, think about it. 2, of the top 3 best big men. I know you're big on Marc Gasol over there, but I would argue that these might be, still the 2 most talented big men in the league. And the thing is, though, about these 2 guys is they're not traditional centers, though. Both of these guys have the ability to shoot the ball. They can spread the floor on you. They're not just going to stay in the post the whole time. Both really, really good defenders. And that's just going to be extremely difficult for teams going forward. I expect probably DeMarcus is going to obviously be the 5. And that finally gives Anthony a little bit of room to, kind of run the edges and whatnot. And, get a little more involved in different parts of the offense. But this is just going to be a really, really dangerous team going forward. Let's see if they can make a playoff push heading down, towards the end of the season. And we're getting into the last 2 months here. We'll see if they can make a push towards that. And maybe, who knows, they make it to the playoffs. If they're gelling at the right time, maybe they'll make some noise.
Yeah, I think it's definitely easy to talk about the excitement factor here, to talk about, all the things that we can envision with both Davis and Cousins on the floor at the same time. But before we get into that, I kind of want to look at the Sacramento side of this deal. This is a team that has put its fans through a lot of misery. I mean, they haven't really made a deep playoff push since, the early 2000s with those teams with, Peja Stojakovic and Mike Bibby. So, you look at it from Sacramento's side, they have a generational talent in Cousins. I think someone who, during the change of the center position in the NBA, was able to adapt to it. Like you said, he's a guy who can spread the floor. He can play on the perimeter even a little bit. And this is a guy that, he gave a lot to Sacramento. He changed with them as he needed. I think he was more mature than people gave him credit for. I think, it kind of blew up in the news whenever he would have some sort of something come up just based on his reputation coming out of college, such a huge personality coming out of Kentucky. But I think Sacramento fans have just had way too much to go through, so much heartbreak, and Cousins seemed to be, something that they could hold on to for a while. Definitely gave them some hope. he's a guy that you can build a team around, and they just unfortunately did not do that. And it wasn't for lack of trying. They've tried the guards over the years with Rudy Gay and Ben McLemore and people like that, but they were never able to get him that missing piece that kind of got them to the next level. And so you look, coming into this season, they're sitting a few games out of that last playoff spot. And it's surprising. People don't expect the Kings this late into the season to be relevant. And what do? They go ahead and they make themselves irrelevant for, who knows how many more years going forward. Just a little bit of reaction from Sacramento fans online just shows that they don't want to support this team anymore. They don't want to support a team that doesn't look like it's headed in any sort of positive direction. One they've waited so long for them to get into. So, getting Buddy Hield out of this, I think Divac is a little in over his head. I think he values Hield as someone he's not. Hield was obviously a very talented scorer out of Oklahoma. Hasn't made too much noise in the NBA yet. He's a guy that I think can develop into a solid player, a solid scorer, but I don't think he's ever going to, be a huge superstar in this league. Sacramento also gets a first-round pick out of it. Who knows what that's going to end up being. But, yeah, I think you were right about the Pelicans getting a steal out of this. You got to – if there's a proven talent and you've got unproven talent and you want to win, in the short term, you always make that deal. It's the same kind of trade, I feel, as probably to a lesser extent. But, as a Cleveland fan, I always think back to the Kevin Love for Andrew Wiggins deal. A lot of people criticize that. Obviously, Wiggins was the number one pick. He wasn't Buddy Hield doesn't have the kind of upside that Andrew Wiggins has. But on the other end of that, DeMarcus Cousins, I think at his position is much more dominant than Kevin Love is. So, there were a lot of people criticizing that kind of deal and, do you, for the win now, do you sacrifice such a big future? I think it's the other way around in this deal. I think the big future is the thing that is less, the big future for Buddy Hield is something that is less concrete than the immediate effect that Cousins is going to have in New Orleans. So I think it's a lot less of a risk, if that makes sense. So, I think Sacramento, it just doesn't really look like that organization has a direction or knows what it wants to be. I've seen several sports writers talk about how, the Kings were almost relieved to have Cousins out of that locker room just for a culture change. But I think that was kind of, played up a little bit. And I think that Cousins, had come around to what he was going to be, and the Kings didn't put anybody around him. And, their fans are now the ones suffering from it.
Yeah, Mike, obviously just devastating for the fan base there. And there just didn't seem like there has much of a future there with Cousins anyways, as is, he was there for what, how many years?
I want to say 5 or 6.
Yeah, 5 or 6 years, and what? They haven't gone to the playoffs in any of those years. So they had that talent there the whole time, and they still weren't able to do enough to put enough around him to get him to a playoff position. So, what else can you do if it's not working? If it's not working, why continue to try? Give him a start fresh, give you a start fresh, and go forward from there.
Yeah, I see what you're saying on the fresh start thing for both Sacramento as an organization and Cousins, but I tend to swing the other way, where I think that when you're 6 years in, there isn't much room for a fresh start when you have someone at the peak of their talent right here. You've got to attack the project in front of you. You've got to commit to spending some money because I think a fresh start kind of just throws all that out the window. When you have a piece there, I think you need to use it. That said, look at the Pelicans. Look at the pieces they have now. It's definitely going to be a happier time in New Orleans than Sacramento over these next few years. You look at the Pelicans, you talked a little bit about it before. Just look at the interior of that team. Down low, you have Anthony Davis and you have Boogie Cousins. And I think you're right, no doubt, that Boogie runs the 5 and Davis gets a little more free range out, on the perimeter. But I think their offense can be such a dynamic thing now because both of those players are that kind of stretch 5 player that can, draw opposing big men out of the paint, but opposing big men that can't really run with Cousins and Davis. We've seen these guys not routinely, but semi-routinely pull up from 3 before. So, it's that kind of league now with centers, and these are 2 guys that have the body types that fit the old kind of center, the really big bruisers in the paint, but they can really, have an effect outside of the paint and, almost playing it like they're a hybrid 4-5. And I think having 2 of those guys can be lethal, especially with teams around the West and just around the NBA in general, mostly going small. They're kind of taking a different approach. They're taking that Memphis Grizzlies, Randolph Gasol approach to having, a team built around those guys who are big and who can, make big-time mismatches for other teams. And I think that it's going to be pretty exciting to see what they can do, especially on that offensive end. And then on the defensive side of the ball, you did mention, these aren't your stiff centers that can't really move with people. Like we said, they can come out on the perimeter. So these are guys that can defend. So this creates a lot of matchup problems. That's the main thing that I'm trying to get at. This New Orleans team is going to scare teams, but not with their size. I think it's with the kind of speed they have with the size. And they're going to create on the offensive end. There's not much you can put on both of those guys at the same time. But on the defensive end as well, it's not going to become a thing where they kind of disappear down there and, teams are scoring on them every possession. So I think this is just a huge move, really puts New Orleans in the driver's seat out of those teams that are vying for that final spot. And I think they could even get up, they could get up to a 7 seed. That's something that's not out of the picture. And, you touched on it a little earlier as well, Matt. They could make noise in the playoffs. It depends on who that matchup is. If they get a smaller team, not trying to, point fingers, but Golden State is a smaller team. They're not, bruising on the glass. That's kind of been their weakness. And that was their weakness last year in the finals. And it was, exposed by teams that can rebound. So look at, a team that's built completely opposite from Golden State. And, you just have to wonder what would happen in that kind of matchup.
Absolutely, Mike. There's no doubt about it. Those two guys are going to cause some real problems down low for teams, on the defensive side of the ball. But just the biggest thing for me that's just kind of a huge letdown at the moment, or just like a deterrent for me going forward with this team is, I guess there's going to be two things for me. First off, obviously, anytime a new acquisition like this, comes to a team, a huge player, like say, for instance, right now, DeMarcus Cousins, obviously, it's going to take time for guys to gel. I don't see them instantly coming in and it working right away. I think it's going to still take a little time to kind of feel the flow between him and Davis. And another thing with this Pelicans team at the moment, who are their guards? Besides these two guys right now, Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins, Drew Holiday? Solomon Hill? You don't really have much guard or forward play at the moment. So, it's really going to go through these guys. And to truly be successful, down the stretch, they're going to have to get huge play out of their guards and whatnot. And I think that's honestly going to be the key going forward. I don't think you're going to have to worry about, DeMarcus Cousins and Anthony Davis down low. They're going to do their thing. But will the guards and, other key players and key bench players come up and help them? And just allow them to, to really fill in those pieces that they need, because it's going to have to be a complete team effort. As great as Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins are, they can't do it all. They're going to have to get that play from other guys on the team.
Yeah, you're definitely right about that. People are getting, and myself included, people are getting carried away with just how excited this looks. Obviously, nobody has seen them play together yet. So, by the time this podcast comes out, maybe we will. But, no one's going to have seen them, for a long period of time playing the kind of basketball that players who have played together for, a year, 2 years have that kind of synergy, I guess. So, it's going to be interesting to see, but you're right. They don't have much around them. Holiday is, a former All-Star one time, I think. But yeah, outside of that roster is pretty depleted still. That was a team that, other than Anthony Davis, was also still in a rebuild. Now, I think they've significantly improved, obviously, with DeMarcus Cousins, and they've kind of, pushed themselves a lot further down on that rebuild. And it's exciting to see because these guys have room to grow still. Anthony Davis is, I believe, 23. Cousins is 25 or 26. These are young guys who are in, or probably not even in, approaching their prime. So this is a team that could hang around for a bit, and this is the time that New Orleans has to, kind of buckle down, get these guys, signed long term. Cousins has that expiring contract that, was a big story in Sacramento, and that was a lot of the reason why these talks about, whether or not he would stay or go came up a lot, in this year and in the past summer and whatnot. So I think New Orleans, first off, has to make sure that what they're trying to make it work, they have to commit to it for a few years. And I think that's something that's definitely worth it. And then past that, you got to start, looking at options on the free agency market, looking for, some playmakers that allow this team to not only stay relevant, but to really compete. You've got those building blocks, those guys in the middle that you're going to have there anchoring your team. Now you got to get the guys around them. And that means a bench as well as, the other three starters. Holiday, he's a serviceable starter. I think he's a serviceable NBA starter when you have two stars on your team. So I think they need to solidify that bench in these coming years. But I think just the prospect of what this team could be is exciting. And for right now, it's just kind of interesting.
And you know what, Mike, as we're comparing these two organizations, let's kind of point this out. You have Sacramento, who has this perennial all-star, DeMarcus Cousins, who year after year, they just truly couldn't get, a special person to come and join him up there, or just, multiple guys to really fulfill that team and get them to where they could be with DeMarcus Cousins there. They didn't put enough around him. Compare that right now to New Orleans, where over the past few years they've had Anthony Davis and whatnot, obviously one of the best players in this league. And, they made the playoffs in whatnot a few years, but it just truly nothing to, get them in conversation with the rest of the teams in the West. So you have an organization like New Orleans who goes out and helps their superstar. They bring in a guy like DeMarcus Cousins, someone to help him right away that can really push them to that point. You look at Sacramento, on the other hand, they weren't willing to sacrifice to truly make that organization successful with DeMarcus Cousins. That just truly shows you the state of where both of these franchises are at right now. One is heading down a really dark path and the other a really bright one. And, staying in the West, Mike, right now, looking at, another team that's trying to rebuild, you got the Lakers now getting some buzz in the news, obviously making huge changes to their staff. Obviously, Jeannie Buss finally going ahead and calling it quits on her brother and, finally ending it, which needed to be done. And they fire the GM, Kupchak, as well, getting him out of there. Just, they're taking a fresh approach too, bringing in Irving, Magic Johnson. Lakers fans get excited. The Magic has returned to take the Lakers to the promised land, right, Mike?
Yeah, we'll say it's a step in the direction of the promised land. I think the Lakers, they've had a rough go of it these last few years, and I think Jeannie Buss definitely, with a very bold move, but something like you said, it needed to be done, and they did it, and it's exciting. And they have Magic Johnson, running a large portion of that team now, and we'll see how he does. He's been talking about, I would definitely like to do that someday, a lot recently. And, talking about, the first thing I would do if I were in charge of the Lakers, I'd bring in Kobe Bryant. And so I think it's the Lakers. They have these big dreams of what they want the team to be run like. And, they're starting to try and, sort of dig into that, see what they can be. They've got a lot of young talent. There's on the upswing of a, sort of a new era of Lakers basketball. And now it's going to be, headed by Magic Johnson. So we'll see where that takes them. I think it's a positive thing for now. I think it's going to be interesting to see. But yeah, we'll see how he settles in there and how this season sort of ends. And then, getting some momentum into the summer, kind of see if they start taking off as fast as some people hope and expect them to. And as we speak, it is the Wednesday before the trade deadline, Thursday, so a lot of buzz around what could happen, a lot of teams looking for that extra playmaker, even in that Sacramento deal with New Orleans. A lot of guys that New Orleans either did let go of or are, kind of possibly looking to drop for salary reasons. People like Terrence Jones, guys like that. Yesterday, who was the Houston-LA trade? They had Lou Williams is going to Houston.
Lou Williams.
Yeah, so Lou Williams on his way to Houston, Corey Brewer, and I believe a pick going to the Lakers. So things like that, nothing huge anymore. I think Boogie was pretty much the biggest domino to fall. But, it's going to send off possibly, a flurry of other little moves that contenders are trying to make to stay, not to stay relevant, but probably to increase their chances heading down, this stretch run towards the playoffs. It's getting towards March. I mean, that's... the competition, as we talked about in the last episode, is definitely heating up for those playoff spots. Not only for the overall 8 spots to get into the playoffs, but for the particular spots too for the seeding. So I think it's going to be interesting to see who picks up whom. As a Cavs fan, I know that we're definitely in on trying to get someone. They want another rotation player, and there's a lot of them available. A lot of people that can step in and help teams rotation wise. So yeah, I just think it's going to be interesting in this next day or so.
Yeah, Mike, and just to kind of go off of what you mentioned there, tonight is the Wednesday before the official trade deadline tomorrow on Thursday, and I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts about, you just talked about your Cavs now, and there's some buzz going around that the Cavs could possibly trade Iman Shumpert to the Houston Rockets in exchange for Patrick Beverley. Now, I know obviously throughout the course of this season, LeBron's been very vocal towards the front office about getting a backup point guard. Someone that could come in there and give Kyrie just a little bit of more time to rest on the bench. Kyrie is playing extremely extended minutes, and just they needed someone that can come in off the bench and help him out a little bit. So what are your thoughts if that trade were to go through?
That's an interesting one. I hadn't actually heard that until you just said it. I've seen a lot around about, what the Cavs want to do with Shumpert. He's definitely the most flexible piece they have, I believe, right now. I mean, you've got a lot of wing players there. You've got some defenders. You certainly have a lot of shooters, and that's not one of Shumpert's strongest points, but that's something he's improved on this year. But it's nothing that they would really miss. I think they would most see a change in just how that locker room is kind of constructed. I mean, Shumpert's a pretty vocal guy. He's definitely a part of that culture. And Beverly, he's had his run-ins before. He's a bit of a question mark in the locker room. I think the culture that LeBron has brought to Cleveland would definitely, round him into some sort of shape if he's not already in it. I mean, he hasn't been like awful. But I think Patrick Beverly, I mean, that's such a solid backup point guard. I mean, he's a starting point guard in the NBA when he's at his best. When he's at his best, he's one of the better point guards in the NBA, as we saw several seasons ago. So I think that's something that's really interesting. I don't know if they would do that, and I don't think I'd be totally against it. I wouldn't be like really concerned because that's definitely someone who can step in for Kyrie. I mean, they kind of got screwed in that whole Mo Williams thing. I don't know if we've talked about that before, but Mo Williams left them without a backup point guard after he took he was taking up a roster spot without telling them whether or not he was coming back from his injury, and then they eventually just ended up, I believe, throwing him in the Korver trade. I think he was part of that.
He was.
Okay. So, he was taking up a roster spot for forever. They saw Dellavedova sign a big deal that they weren't going to spend the kind of money on, in Milwaukee. So they were left without a backup point guard. And then when Smith went down, it's just such an absence of guards there. So, they've been talking about getting rotation pieces. They picked up Derek Williams. They just signed him to a second 10-day contract because the first one went very well. And, LeBron was also vocal about him staying around. So I think they're looking for pieces. A lot of Cavs fans really want them to get Terrence Jones from New Orleans, someone I mentioned earlier. But if they could get a guard in the process of trying to get a rotation player, kill two birds with one stone, that would be huge. And Patrick Beverly would be somebody, definitely somebody to look at. I think Shumpert would be missed in that locker room, but I don't think it would be something that would, put this Cavs team on a bad track heading into the playoffs. I think they'd regroup pretty quickly and get it together. So I think that'd be interesting. I don't necessarily want it to happen, but if it did happen, I wouldn't really react. I kind of sit back and wait. So that's what I have for you on that.
You know what, Mike? I think just the grand scheme out of all this and what we're finally seeing throughout this year is that the whole time, you know what the missing piece for the Cavs was? Dellavedova, Mike. It's all about Delly, man.
It is. It's Delly. It's his absence. Outback Jesus, as he was known in Cleveland.
Outback Jesus. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. This has been episode 6 of the Mostly NBA podcast. Looking forward to getting back with you guys, talking a little more ball heading into the future, and just seeing how the New Orleans trade worked out too, and other things looking forward. So on behalf of Michael Higgins, I'm Matt LeVay, and thank you for joining us.